I started to actually investigate myself and research locations and property areas, going down that path, but not having a lot of time or a great deal of knowledge. And when you're considering using your own money for the next purchase, wanting to get it right and making sure that you're not going to end up more out of pocket with another investment property. You want to make sure that you've got that growth. So I had been listening to the Dashdot podcast for a good 12 months. And at this time, when we were starting to refinance, I said to my husband, look, I've been looking. I'm not confident in my skills and abilities. I think we should reach out to Dashdot.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Dashdot Insider, the auditory epicenter for passionate property investors seeking a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. Joining me today, we have another one of our fantastic clients here at Dashdot. We're speaking to Leanne Portman. How's it going, Leanne?
Great, thank you. How are you?
Awesome. It's great to have you here as well. To start off with, let's start with sort of where things are at the moment for you in terms of your portfolio so that everyone listening has a little bit of background and sort of get to know you a little bit.
So we currently have 3 investment properties and a unit inside our super, plus our own residential property. So I think that's 5 in total.
5 in total, nice. And you've bought a couple of those with us here at Dashdot. One up in Townsville, which you originally bought for $435,000. The May valuation from this year, so you'll probably be due for another val coming in next month or the month after, was $536,000. So total growth since purchase is 23.22%, which is pretty good. $101,000, but I would say if that's 6 months ago in Townsville, there's a very good chance that now you're going to be pushing 550, 560, I would guess. But of course, we'll leave it to the professional valuers to get an actual val when the time comes. And you have another one in the Hunter Valley region, and that one is a very recent purchase. And the May val was $505,000, so that's up $30,000 from the $475,000. So total portfolio growth on paper at the moment from the vals that we have, around about $130,000, but in reality could well be another $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on top of that. That's just for those 2 properties. So those are standalone dwellings. You mentioned that you do have 2 other investment properties as well, right?
Yes, we do. We have another one up in Newcastle. That's a standalone 4-bedroom house that we purchased. It was actually a brand new build. So we received a call just one day that I took. It was a spruiking call, and I'm a little bit more, go with the flow with these types of things. So I just took the call, then took the next call. There was a follow-up call, and in the end, we ended up agreeing to purchasing a brand new land and house package in Newcastle, and that was sort of our first investment property. We'd sort of done some renovations on our house. We had some equity in the house. It had been something that we, had talked about doing, and it just sort of came up at that time. So that was late 2019, and then the property settled in 2020, towards the end of 2020. Investigating property investing, there's people out there saying that buying a new house and land package is the worst investment strategy to go down, but actually that one's done quite well for us. So I don't know whether it was a case of right place, right time and being lucky, or whether it was something that, they did have stats in the areas and they had done some research as to the reasoning why, Newcastle in this particular suburb. So we went with that.
Okay, well, 2 things. First up, you've just said on a podcast that you'll pretty go with the flow. I'm worried now that you're going to be inundated with calls from property spruikers saying, I've got a cracking deal for you. Can I interest you in investment property? You're going to be feeling those all week now. But the other thing is, house and land packages, they are fairly interesting. The reason that some people don't like them is because there is an increased level of risk when you're purchasing them, because the thing still needs to be built. And what happens if there are problems with getting supplies, right, or materials, tradies, costs can pop up a fair bit, and depending on how the contract is written, you can end up being out of pocket for those. Or what if the builder goes under? There are all of these risks, and holding costs if you're making your payments throughout while the build is happening. They can often work out okay because you can factor in all of those things, and it all works out. But there is an increased level of risk whenever you're building something as opposed to buying something that's already built. Not to say that already built doesn't come with risks as well, right? That's why we have pest inspections, building inspections, all of the reports that you would get, all of the due diligence, checking floodplains, fire risk areas, all of these kinds of things that you need to check as well. And what you're trying to do is reduce the risk to as low as possible. And it's easier to do that if it's already built. But if you get the right house and land package, those can also work, as you've discovered. So you've got a pretty decent sized portfolio now. It sounds like you're well on your way. What made you decide that investing in property in the first instance was the right move for you and your partner?
It was something that had always sort of been in the back of my mind, something that, when you get to a particular point, you'd look at investigating and going down that path. My parents bought one investment property on the advice of their accountant. My dad's tax was too much, so they then just went driving up the coast, ended up locating a property in mid New South Wales, north New South Wales. But that was it. And then they ended up selling their Sydney house and actually moving into that investment property up the coast. So that's where they live, for the last 25 years. And then we had friends start to invest in property. But we sort of had just wanted to upgrade our house, do some renovations before we investigated, going down that path. So it wasn't until I received this phone call out of the blue, querying whether we had equity in the house and asking some of those questions that we kicked that off. So once we did the first property up in Newcastle, then a couple of years later, we were looking to refinance and go again from the equity that we had built in the Newcastle property.
That is super interesting to me because I think you are the first guest that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to quite a few, obviously, who has said, yeah, the reason I got into property is because I answered the phone one day and it just happened to be the right deal that got put in front of me. Like normally I get the stock answers of, well, I've been listening to your podcast for ages, Emil, hint, hint. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You'd be amazed how many times that pops up. But here it's just right place, right time, got the right investment. And I guess that's sort of been the snowflake at the top of the mountain that's turning into the big snowball as it rolls down. And now that little kernel has turned into the whole property portfolio. Am I right in thinking that it's once you saw the growth happen out of that first property, that's the moment at which it's like, wow, this stuff works. Let's do more of it?
It was, and also seeing friends building up quite a substantial property portfolio. So having, conversations with them as well. But we knew we had more equity within our house in Sydney and in the Newcastle property, that when we were looking to refinance, the broker said, okay, what do you want to do with this excess equity? And we thought, okay, well, we could go again. So I started to actually investigate myself and research locations and property areas, going down that path, but not having a lot of time or a great deal of knowledge. And when you're considering using your own money for the next purchase, wanting to get it right and making sure that you're not going to end up more out of pocket with another investment property. You want to make sure that you've got that growth. So I had been listening to the Dashdot podcast for a good 12 months. And at this time, when we were starting to refinance, I said to my husband, look, I've been looking. I'm not confident in my skills and abilities. I think we should reach out to Dashdot. He's very skeptical, risk adverse, cautious, totally the opposite to me. But he agreed to sit down with Dashdot, because I think that first interview you have with the team, they say this is just a let's get to know each other. It's not a hard sales call. So I think from that perspective, that helped ease my husband into, the fact that we weren't going to have this hard sell and that we could go, no, this is not for us, or yes, let's proceed. So we ended up going down that path.
Okay. Well, your husband, Chris, what does he do for a living?
He is a software platform developer in IT.
So I would imagine, and stereotypes, generalizations, sometimes they're a bit wrong, but they save a lot of time. He's highly analytical, as you mentioned. Okay. And so what I think this is really useful for everyone listening, because a lot of people I know and I talk to all the time, they love property, right? They understand it, they get around it, and emotionally, right? They're very energetically engaged with the idea of building a property portfolio, and yet they might have a spouse, a partner, someone that they would need to go into the property with, who is more of the analytical mindset. So, what was it that helped you sort of get Chris to get on the same train?
I think once he saw that level of detail that Dashdot investigate go into the research behind the state, suburb, down to the street level, down to the property as to why, and then also their research moving forward as to the growth within that property that they're looking at. I think he could then see the benefit in going with Dashdot and that growth that we'd get from that next investment property.
Right. I've heard sometimes it's very helpful just to say something like, "All right, well let's have a chat to them. Let's see if they are detailed enough for you. If they're not detailed enough, then it's all right." And I can say that because I've got a lot of confidence in the guys and just how sort of methodical and like almost sort of psychopathically detailed when it comes to filtering out which properties we can present and which ones we can't. So I'd like to sort of change topic just a little bit and start talking about the future. Now that we've worked out what your portfolio looks like now, what the triggers were, how you got Chris on board, do you think about retirement much?
I do. I do.
Okay.
I am in my late 40s. Chris is early 40s, so he's a bit younger than myself. But he'll be working up until his deathbed, whereas I have um,
That's
no
because he loves it,
inclination.
right?
He does love his job. He loves his work.
Okay, that's the
Um,
reason. He's
I
not
do love
fat.
my job, but at the same time, I want to live the rest of my life and go out there and experience what the world and life has to offer. Especially once the girls grow up and grandkids and all of that. I'd like to be able to
Mm.
spend more time at home. So the property portfolio will be generally for retirement purposes. Hopefully, we will leave a bit of a legacy and won't spend it all, but it was generally for retirement and early retirement.
Okay. Do you have how many children do you have?
We've got 3 girls
Three
that
girls. How old
vary,
are they?
26, 12, and 3.
That is quite a spread.
It is. It
That
is.
means the three-year-old, I imagine you're gearing up so that you can give the 3-year-old lots of attention, retire early. Okay. Do you have an age or a specific date at which you want to retire?
um, you know, Between 55 and 60, I think,
Okay.
yeah, would be ideal. Um, Knowing that I had our third child quite late in life, she'll
Mm.
be a teenager when I'm in my 60s, which doesn't thrill me any very much. That's the reality. So I think between 55 and 60.
Okay. And do you have an idea of how many properties you're going to need at that point, or equity or anything like that?
Uh, we've estimated probably 5 properties, so we'll probably purchase another 2 to get to that point.
So that's 5 investment properties plus the principal place of
Residential,
residence.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Nice. All right. Well, just to get another 2 properties sounds like you're probably not too far away from being able to pull the trigger on another one or two. So there's a reasonable chance you might get there before 55 as well, which would make it pretty good. I know that a lot of people are sort of looking at retirement and seeing their parents and seeing family members kind of struggle in retirement because they don't have a big asset base. Um, Do you have any sort of unique perspectives on that, or has that been a factor?
That has been a factor. My parents were of the eight, well, before super came in, so they had done most of their working life before superannuation came in. They've now both retired, or my dad has semi-retired. He's still working. Mum's fully retired. They're in their early 70s. But I can see, the longevity, because my grandparents died late 90s. So I'm expecting my parents, to get into their 90s. So they've got another 20, 25 years with not a lot of super and having to rely on the pension. So they're, very cautious, especially in the current economic environment, um, around their money, but making sure that Chris and myself don't have that position when we're coming up to retirement. We don't have that extra stress.
Okay. And is your father working part time by choice, or is it a bit of a sort of need to, or
I think it's a
economic?
a bit of both. He's like, if I retire, then what am I going to do? Whereas, mum's ready for dad to fully retire so they can start traveling and spending some more time together. But yeah, dad's also conscious of the money aspect. Yes.
Okay. I'd like to ask you, there are a lot of different investment vehicles out there, property, shares. What made you choose property over some of the others like crypto or gold or whatever it might be?
I think especially the property market in Australia, even though there has been drops over the years, it's always come back up. And just the current market, I think, we won't ever have a massive crash, property market crash. It'll continue to increase. It's something tangible. You can see it. Whereas shares and crypto there's a little bit more to it. It's more complex, I think, whether it's just a hold and buy strategy or you are trading, there's more knowledge there to be had. Whereas with property, it's quite easy to understand some of those investment concepts.
Yeah, I think it also comes into, or age can be a factor because as we get older, and I think you and I are probably around about the same age, we're of the same vintage, let's put it that way. Um, the uh, attitude towards risk tends to change. And when you're young, yeah, you can take a flutter on crypto or on shares and things like that. And you can do the research because you have all of the energy and you've got all the time in the world to do it. And if you make a mistake, you can earn it back. And what I am finding is, first, there are very few people in their 20s and their early 20s who are making tons of money out of shares unless it's purely by luck. Most people are sort of like, yeah, they're doing okay. But compared to a friend they might have who goes into property, they're not doing as well. And so there's that factor. And also, I think as we get older, we do sort of take an attitude towards risk that's a little bit more conservative because we don't have time to make it back. And we're more patient. We're quite happy to let a portfolio grow for 5 years and think, yeah, basically, then I get to retire, or if it's 10 years, whatever that number might be, which is really fantastic. Whereas if you don't have that patience, it's like, no, I want to retire now, then people start taking bigger risks. So I think it's an interesting sort of approach. All right, your goal is to head into retirement without financial restrictions. So to have the freedom, choice, and abundance that property can give you, what do you want to do with your time when you retire? What's the dream?
That I haven't really worked out yet. So I think the thought of not working full time is great, but then I also know myself, and I will definitely have to do something. Um, so it's working out. Okay, what would that look like? So I would probably still work part time, or definitely cut down hours. But what would that look like? So I'd move away from the 9 to 5 corporate world that I'm currently in, and do something a little bit more um, creative, or I don't know. I'm still sort of working through that one.
I've realised that I haven't actually asked you yet on this episode what you actually do for a living. What do you do, Leanne?
I'm a project manager in IT.
Okay, so what does that mean? Sort of like project manager is a term that we hear a lot of, sort of like general manager or something like that. Like what?
So it's managing upgrades of different IT type systems, software, applications, infrastructure. Um, so it does vary, but it's managing a large team to implement a particular project or upgrade of an IT system.
Okay, well, I'm tempted to ask if you enjoy it. I get a sense that you do, but
I do.
also I don't want you to sort of have to say not really, and the boss watches the episode and it's sort of Leanne, let's have a little chat.
No, I do enjoy it. Um, it can be a bit stressful, can be long days at times, but no, it's something I do enjoy. I'm quite organised and methodical, and I think that's where project management suits my skills, and I can manage a big team and get the job done.
Okay. I also noticed that the properties that you've bought that are going to create this freedom for you fairly shortly, or at least the two that you've bought with us here at Dashdot. I mean, you've mentioned Newcastle as well, right?
That's correct.
You've got Townsville, you've got the Hunter Valley, you've got Newcastle. You're based in,
Sydney in Penrith.
so that's quite a spray, quite a spread of properties that you have. How do you feel about having these properties that are so far away?
That it doesn't bother me. I think that the Townsville one we've never seen. I've only ever seen through photos and the inspection reports. The Hunter Valley property, we did actually go up there when we settled earlier this year, just because it was in a bit of a state of disrepair. So we went up there and spent a couple of weekends up there just cleaning up the property after the previous owners moved out, and just put down new carpet, painted, thoroughly cleaned the kitchen and the bathrooms, thoroughly cleaned up the backyard. It was left in a bit of a mess. But then we haven't been up there since. So it's had a tenant in it, I think within a month after we settled. Tenants moved in, and we haven't had to go back up there since. Our other Newcastle property, it's been a couple of years since we've actually been up there to see it. We haven't had to do anything up there either. And then the Townsville property, so they're very easy to maintain. You do have to build that relationship with your property manager, which we do. And our property managers are great, and we've had some really good tenants within the properties as well, which has helped.
That is amazing to me that like you've never actually seen Townsville property and you've had it for sort of nearly 3 years.
That's correct.
And so it's up there. It's just sort of sitting there. You've never actually seen it. Now, I understand when people buy shares, you get a share certificate, but you don't actually like see shares because they're not tangible. With gold, you buy gold, but it's kept in the vault somewhere. You don't actually see it. And with crypto, well, that's just in the air anyway. And so people are kind of used to not seeing those. But when it's property, so many people have this sort of bias that, oh, yeah, I'll pop up and take a look at it. Whereas in your case, you've just sort of like, no, it's just like gold. It's just like shares. It's on a bit of paper. I have this bit of paper. I have this bit of paper. I have to make a few more phone calls than what I might normally need to make. I need to call the property manager. I need to call, if there needs to be any maintenance. Do you have to call anyone else apart from the property manager?
No, I don't think so, actually. If there is an issue with the property, they contact us. I think we're pretty good landlords. We jump on any maintenance issues straight away, and organise, or the property manager organises the quotes or organises to have the work done. And it's actually, given that we are so busy just with our careers and our family, it makes it easier that we're not sort of managing or having to really keep on top of these properties. So it's actually been easy to manage from that perspective.
Nice. And probably a little bit better than if it is just around the corner of the suburb that you live in. There's always a temptation to pop around and have a look at it, and that can probably cause more stress than it takes away. Whereas if it's in Townsville, out of sight, out of mind, don't really have to worry about it. Get a phone call once every month, once every couple of months, once every 6 months or something from the property manager just saying, yep, everything's going well,
Mm-hmm.
tenant's happy. Okay. Well, it sounds like you've really cracked the code, and now you're just sort of looking at the clock, waiting for the mid 50s the mid-50s to roll around so that you can down tools and then discover a creative outlet. I get a sense from the way you described it before, there's a creative outlet somewhere in there. You're just not quite sure what it is yet.
I think so. I think so. I'm just I'm looking to embark on a diploma of counselling, so I'll see where that takes me. But I think, yeah, it's just investigating what else is out there that I might be interested to learn, pick up new skills, new knowledge. To, I suppose, just keep me busy during the week.
Keep the mind entertained.
Yes. Yep.
And it must be a wonderful feeling to have reached that point where you can actually start to think about that sort of thing. Whereas most people are sort of just stuck on the corporate hamster wheel thinking save, invest. And sort of as you're acquiring more and more properties, getting to a point where you can start to think, oh, well, what actually comes after this?
Yes. Yes. But I think that's also the tricky part, because I thought it would be easy to come up with, okay, what will I do once I have, semi-retired or be able to work part-time? What do I do? And that's been the hardest part for me, to work out what to do. I'm a scuba diving instructor, so I'd love to be able to do that
Oh, wow.
a little bit more.
Okay. That came out of nowhere.
Yes, yeah. So I've been diving and teaching for almost 20 years. It's something that I love to do. I mean, having the girls, Chris and I both scuba dive, so we don't have a lot of time at the moment to be able to do that. So that'd be definitely something that we'd get back into and do more of. So that's on the list. But from a day-to-day perspective, yep.
And finding that creative outlet or what it is that you want to do next, even if it's not sort of like crystal clear at the moment, trying to work it out could be a fun process. And at the very least, it's a good problem to have, right?
Yes,
It's
it
a much
is.
better problem than how am I going to pay the rent this week? How am I going to afford the groceries? It's a much better problem, though, sort of like how am I going to express myself creatively to the world? That I feel like it's a much nicer thing to have to consider.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, on that note, I think it's a really nice note at which to wrap things up. Any thoughts or recommendations before we go for anyone listening to the episode who's sort of on the fence, thinking about property? What would you say to that person?
I would definitely say to reach out to the Dashdot team, have that initial call, meet with them, see what they have to say. It's definitely a decision that we have not regretted. Just the level of detail that you get with the areas that they're currently looking at, from an investing perspective, down to the suburb, down to those government projects that might be up and running within those suburbs, and that'll bring in those tenants that you need. Just that level of detail and research is quite amazing, and it definitely will, I suppose, ease your mind as to making that right decision. But yeah, the two properties that we've bought so far have had that growth, as you've mentioned, and we're definitely not disappointed with the rental income that we've received and the rental growth from those properties as well.
Oh, brilliant. All right. Well, and to everyone listening, the purpose of any calls that you have with Dashdot, it's almost always just to provide information, right? So that you can make the best decisions for yourself, your situation, your portfolio, if you have one or if you're going to have one, so that you've got the information so you can make the best decisions moving forward. That's all it really is.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
Leanne, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for jumping on, even though I can tell you're a little bit under the weather at the moment, still recovering
I
from
am
either
from the
either
flu.
a very boozy weekend or the flu. Okay, it's the
I
flu.
wish it
Okay,
was a boozy weekend. No, no, still struggling from the flu, but no, thank you for having me. It's been great.
all right. Well, thank you so much, and to everyone listening, we hope you will tune in for the next episode. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.